the guys over at guys and gals over at EarthQuaker Devices gave us some pedals to do reviews of and to talk about on the podcast.
Yeah.
And we said thank you very much, and we took them home, and that's what we're going to be doing for the next 3 episodes, unless we get something else to throw in the mix.
Yeah.
But I am holding...
I mean, it won't be the only thing we talk about.
No,
for the next
of
3
course
episodes.
not. Of course not. And we're going to be honest about these pedals. We're not going to... We're putting ourselves out there in 2015 to be doing more demo reviews, more gear reviews of things that are sent to us. We're setting up like a marketing program for people.
Yeah.
But basically, the outline of it is that they send us our stuff with return shipping, and we will just do a review and send it back to them.
Right.
And so we're going to give honest reviews. We're going to say what we really feel about this stuff. Don't worry, guys. We haven't sold out yet. I mean, someone hasn't shown up with a big enough pile of money for us to sell out yet. But this is the beginning of what we're trying to do this year. So basically, EarthQuaker Devices gave us a Palisades to review, which is kind of their tube screamer killer.
Yeah. So in the little write-up they talk about how originally, like, they never wanted to do tube screamer clone, but like people kept asking for it. So,
sure.
So they got a bunch of tube screamers and tube screamer clones and whatever, and kind of sat down with all of them and tried to figure out what they liked, or like if there was a specific one they wanted to start with as a template. And then they just said, like, screw it, let's just do what we do, which is slap a bunch of knobs on a box.
Is that what they do, Steve?
I think the first EarthQuaker pedal I was exposed to was the Disaster Transport. Is it the Disaster Transport? Is that what it's called?
I'm not sure.
The big delay.
I haven't messed with that one.
I think that's the Disaster Transport is what it's called. The Disaster Transport Senior. I'm probably getting it all wrong.
Probably. There's a really good chance you're getting it all wrong.
I remember looking at it, and it's just got all of these like knobs you can turn.
Yeah.
And it's just they figure out a bunch of different parameters that they feel like they want it, that people are going to want to modify and be able to adjust.
I mean, I've talked about it.
Go for it.
I've talked about it before. I've got the dirt transmitter from EarthQuaker Devices, and that thing basically made me sell all my other fuzz pedals.
Right.
It is exactly the fuzz pedal that I need, and it just nails what I want. So, but let's talk about the Palisades. Like you said, they didn't want to do a tube screamer, and then finally they kind of they cracked and decided to do one. But they've done kind of the ultimate.
Yeah, they didn't just
here.
do one tube screamer.
They didn't
do 2 tube screamers. They didn't do 3 tube screamers. They did 480 tube screamers. 480.
I mean, if you had 479 tube screamers, it's still not as many tube screamers as this.
Yeah.
And why we're saying that is because it's got 2 rotary switches on it. One for voice, which has 6 positions, and one for bandwidth, which has 5 positions. So 6 times 5 is 30.
Right.
Then it's got a normal bright switch. So you can take that 30 and times it to 60. Now you have 60 options. Then there's a buffer on and off switch. Now you're at 120.
Yeah.
Because you just doubled your options again. And then there are 2 gain structures on here. A gain A and a gain B.
Yeah.
One is like a light kind of open, like what you would use for strummy stuff. And one is like your heavy, like lead power chordy kind of drive.
Right.
So there's 2 more options. So what are we at now?
240.
240. And then there's a boost circuit on here. So you get to double it again and you're at 480.
Yeah.
So you could do a different setting on this every day of the year and still have, a bunch left over.
Right.
At least 100, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
100 and some teens.
Yeah.
100 teen.
I'm trying to do math.
That is
correct.
1 year and a third of a year of settings on here, roughly.
Okay. Yes.
Or fourth, closer to a fourth.
I don't know. Somewhere in between. It's probably like exactly almost
3/8.
No, it's probably like almost exactly a third.
It's almost a third, or exactly a third.
Almost exactly
A year and a third of settings on here. So we're going to be reviewing this once a week for a year.
Well, if we do it once a week, then we're going to be.
Well, I'm going to go through the settings and report on all 7 of the settings.
Oh, okay. You're going to report 7 settings per week.
But
okay.
I took this thing home with me. Steve hasn't had the chance to mess around with it. You saw me mess around with it at church last week. I have been having a blast off with this thing. It is a lot of fun. I'm pretty much decided I'm going to sell all my other tube screamers. I'm going to sell my turbo tube screamer.
Right.
I probably can't sell the SD1 because it's worthless.
I thought that thing was MIJ.
Yeah, but it's covered in black paint and marker and stuff.
Just get some acetone.
I could get something for it, but I probably won't sell it. I'll just keep it around.
Rehouse it.
I'm probably going to sell my OCD. I think this thing is kicking the OCD off the board.
Wow.
Yeah, that's kind of a crazy thing to say because I've been using that thing for like 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah.
Something like that consistently. This thing, it just does everything. And it's got the 2 channels on there. So, I mean, it's typical for like my church set, which is what I use my main board for that has a tube screamer on it. It's typical for me to go from a light drive to a heavy drive. Mm-hmm. This does that.
Right.
It's typical for me to need a little bit of boost. This does that. I can dial in like a really classic, like mid-hump fizzy tube screamer with this, or I could open up just a wide, crisp, like transparent, fuzzy, like psychedelic sort of thing. What are you pointing at? I'm
pointing at the paper.
Okay, you want the paper.
I want to do some reading. So yeah,
there's just so much you can do with it, and the thing that I really loved about it last Sunday when I played with it is a thing I like to do is when the band gets going, I like to mess with my settings to find the tone that cuts through. This thing, there's 2 knobs, the 2 rotary knobs. You move through, like what I do is leave the bandwidth at like 2 or 3, and then I would cycle through the voice settings until I hit one that cuts through the mix more than the others.
Right.
That takes about 5 seconds.
That's the voice.
That's the voice knob. And then I leave that where it cut the most, and then I adjust the bandwidth, and then I leave that where it cuts through the most.
So bandwidth is basically like setting your tone and gain structure.
Right.
And voice is kind of like the different clipping styles.
Right.
Like I said, they kind of hit like a lot of the popular styles for tube screamers with the clipping.
Yeah. What I'm saying is it takes me out 10 to 15 seconds to get this thing like 95% of the way of where I need it to be to cut through the mix with the band.
Right. And I think the way you're doing it is the way that works for you. I think a lot of people are probably going to get this, and at least starting out, they're going to think a little more conventionally. And
sure.
Like, that's a nice thing. Like the voice description, setting 1 is no diodes. 2 is LED clipping, which is a popular option. 3 is Mosfet clipping, which I believe is what the full drive uses.
Right.
At least the Mosfet version of the full drive. 4 is asymmetrical silicon clipping, which is like your standard tube screamer clipping. 5 is a symmetrical silicon clipping. Other drive pedals use symmetrical. I forget which ones. I want to say that the SD1 is symmetrical.
Sure.
But it's been a while since I've looked that up. And then 6 is a Schottky diodes, which is like a whole, it's another clipping method. But each one of these different types of clipping is going to have like a different sound associated with it. I know completely different circuit, but with the DS1, swapping out the stock Boss diodes for LEDs, like that was part of the big change in that pedal. So yeah, just a ton of options. Even if you don't, think about the different gain structures and whatever, even if this was just the 2 rotary knobs and you never ventured into like the high gain stuff.
Yeah.
or the higher gain B channel, like you have just a ton of options for like a
Absolutely.
basic overdrive.
They could split this into two pedals, one being the A drive and one being the B drive.
Right.
As long as they put the two rotaries on there and the basic 3-knob volume tone gain control,
I feel like
that would be a killer tube screamer.
I feel like size-wise, though, if you're gonna, because you have so many controls, you pretty much like you're not gonna fit that into a half-size box.
No, probably not. It does need to be in this box. If I was going to add any more knobs to this, I would change it to being like a 3-band EQ, and that would take it over the top.
Is it just master tone?
Yeah, it's just master tone.
Okay.
Which is still what I like to do is I like to flick on the bright switch to give me a little bit of sparkle on the high end, and then roll the tone back to give me some bass end.
Okay.
So that's kind of my jam.
That makes sense with the standard tube screamer actually, because tube screamer circuits tend to be mid-humped.
Yeah.
So basically what you're doing is you're trying to work around the mid-hump.
Yeah, sure. I'm flattening out the signal a little bit. Something that's really surprised me is how big of a difference the buffer switch makes.
Oh yeah.
Like I have pedals that have buffers and don't have buffers. Obviously, we all do. But I've never been able to switch a buffer on and off, and it definitely makes a difference.
Right.
Like the buffer side is a little bit cleaner, but also a little bit fuller, I guess I'd say. And then the buffer off is a little bit kind of muddier and a little bit more subdued.
Interesting. Were you running?
It's really subtle, but it's when you flick it, you're like, okay, there's a big difference.
Were you running this in the front of your chain?
Here's the signal path I've been running. I've been running to tuner, and then to a phaser, and then into this.
Okay.
The Grand Orbiter, which is a pedal we'll talk about in a couple weeks.
Right. So I think your tuner and the Grand Orbiter are both true bypass.
Right.
So there just might be something on the back end of your board that is like sucking tone.
Sure.
Or maybe just your overall signal path, because you're running like a 10-foot cable to your board.
Right.
And then you're running through like 8 or 9 pedals.
Yeah.
And then you're running back another 10 or 15 foot or whatever cable back to your amp. You might just be getting tone loss there.
Sure.
From just all of that cabling.
Yeah.
So if you would buy some high quality cables. No, I mean that's just the nature of running that much copper.
Oh, absolutely.
So
and just all the pedals in between and everything. But it's really neat to have that option.
Yeah.
A negative, I have noticed that this thing is a little bit noisier than my other drive pedals.
Right.
I don't know how much that's actually going to bother me, because noise typically doesn't bother me that much.
Yeah.
And you can always turn down the gain if it bothers you that much.
Do you think it's noisier at the same gain levels?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Compared to the OCD and my other drive pedals, definitely has a noise thing going on. But like I said, I think this thing's going to kick all my tube screamers to the curb.
Right.
These things retail $225, I think. Is that correct?
I'm not 100% sure.
I think they're in that neighborhood. For what it does, if you're a tube screamer user and you've got a couple tube screamers in your collection, it might be worth selling them all and buying this. Steve is looking up the price.
$249.95 on Zazzounds.
So $250.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
But again, you're getting, saying that there's 480 options is silly.
It is.
From a practicality standpoint, like it's not, but it's but if you find say like 3 or 4, like say you get this and you love the gain A, the gain B, and the one option with the boost, that's 3 pedals. You look at it that way, that's basically like $83 for each one of those.
And realistically, it's 3 pedals, but this thing takes up about the space on your board of 2 pedals.
Yeah.
Because the jacks are on the top.
Yeah.
So you have more room on the side to squeeze this thing in. I think here's the thing with tube screamers. Every time I've had a tube screamer, there's always been something I didn't like about it.
Right.
With this, I can dial those things out.
Right.
My turbo tube screamer, it's too mid-humpy, it's too fizzy. With my OCD, it's too crunchy, but also kind of too full. I wish it was a little bit thinner.
Yeah.
With the SD1, I wish it was a little bit more high def sounding.
Right.
If that makes sense. This thing, I can do all that stuff. I was playing around the other day, basically turning on my other tube screamers and trying to get this as close to them as I could. And I couldn't get 100%, but that might have been user error. But I could get it really close. Yeah. And so if I wanted those tones again, I can get it with this. This is the tube screamer for people who don't 100% love their tube screamer. If you have a tube screamer and you 100% love it, then why would you need this? But if you don't 100% love it...
Because gas.
Yeah, gear acquisition syndrome. If you don't 100% love your tube screamer, you need to try this thing.
Yeah.
Is what I would say.